Hello and welcome to the OSEP Virtual Leadership Conference. Just to start, there is a PowerPoint that has been posted to support this presentation. So I want to emphasize that this will not be an RDA 101, but will rather focus on OSEP's discretionary investments that support RDA. So what are the takeaways of this presentation? To support the performance of kids with disabilities, OSEP funds a variety of interconnected investments. We have content centers that address specific content such as Pbis or addressing the needs of deafblind children. We have system centers that take a systemic approach, such as driving early childhood practices by working with states to adopt DEC recommended practices for their personnel. We have information centers that primarily disseminate information, such as the Center for Parent Information and Resources, and we have data centers that focus on improving data systems, use of data, and finance. The best part of all of this is all of these resources are free, online, and available to everyone. You can locate descriptions of each of the centers that I'm going to discuss at www.tadnet.org and go to the Find a Center button. So, I'd like to highlight some of our content centers over the next 10 minutes. The first is the IRIS Center, and IRIS provides free online training modules both for professional development and for use in IHE classes. Examples of their use include statewide training. In Tennessee, they use the RTI modules to train every teacher in the state on RTI. Professional development that gains continuing education credit, and many universities use the modules as part of college classes. Ncii, the National Center for Intensive Intervention. This center focuses on technical assistance to work with kids at the top of the pyramid in terms of behavior and academics. They have a variety of resources, including tools charts, which address interventions and approaches that are research-based. The Pbis Center, the Positive Behavior Intervention and Support Center. Essentially what Pbis Center says is that learning cannot take place in a chaotic environment. It entails teaching kids appropriate behavior, what is expected of them, and teaching adults appropriate behavior, what is expected of them. It addresses supporting all kids, all staff, and all places in the school. It has an extremely strong research base. There have been a variety of randomized control trials, and I think the most important thing to note in terms of RDA is that an improved environment frequently yields improved academic performance, which is consistent with the OSEPs that are focusing on kids' performance. Currently, the Pbis Center is involved in 22,000 schools. Next, we have the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition for improving post-secondary outcomes for all students with disabilities. This is NTAC, and NTAC's purpose is to assist SEAs, LEAs, state VR agencies, and VR service providers in implementing evidence-based and promising practices, ensuring that students with disabilities, including those with significant disabilities, graduate prepared for success in post-secondary education. This center is jointly funded with the Rehabilitative Services Administration. Its major focus is on transition and collaborating with VR agencies. I'm sure most of you know that in the transition process, LEAs are supposed to be collaborating with VR agencies. This can't be described as an area of strength, but we know it's of great importance, so this center supports that particular activity. Our next center is the Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution and Special Education, or CADRE, which is one of our very long-term centers. It works to increase the nation's capacity to effectively resolve special education disputes reducing the use of expensive adversarial processes. Cadre works with state and local education and early intervention systems, parent centers, families, and educators to improve programs and results for kids with disabilities. Some of the things that Cadre focuses on are IEP facilitation training, trauma-informed care, and mediation. So the next set of centers are low incidence content centers, and we have a saying around here that low incidence is not a low priority for OSEP. So we have the National Center for Deaf Blindness. This center works to improve the quality of life for children who are deaf-blind. They support all of our state deaf-blind centers. They identify and encourage new innovations in local, state, and national practice and policy, and they maintain a rich repository of content, history, and knowledge easily available and shared by all who are part of the community of deaf-blindness. Our next low incidence center is Bookshare. Bookshare is the world's largest accessible online library for people with print disabilities. More than 360,000 people in nearly 50 countries have access to Bookshare's collection. Their collection exceeds 350,000 titles. More than 500 U.S. and international publishers contribute by donating their digital files and making it possible for Bookshare to serve users around the world and ensuring that content is available for persons with print disabilities. So what does that mean to you? Well, in terms of Braille, using digital files has reduced the time for a teacher to obtain a book brailled from months to days. I want to stress that blind, visually impaired, and print disabled includes many dyslexic students. So students with very significant reading disabilities can be supported by the audio text that Bookshare can provide. Bookshare has also been involved in the description of media, has created a number of software that has greatly facilitated the efficiency of describing content. Speaking of describing, our next center is the Described and Captioned Media Program. So that's DCMP. So what DCMP is about is it's addressing a problem that many people don't realize exists. And that problem is that producers of educational materials, including network TVs, products are frequently not captioned or described. In fact, the networks are only required to caption a very small number of hours of materials. DCMP does description as well as captioning, has a free loan collection of over 4,000 described and captioned educational media items. So the bottom line here is that if National Geographic produces a documentary on something, they are not required to describe or caption it. DCMP steps in. So for your students with significant hearing issues or vision issues, this is a service that really facilitates their educational process. The next center is PEPNet 2, and PEPNet 2 focuses on secondary and post-secondary support for deaf and hard of hearing students. They provide direct assistance to universities. They actually provide in-person and online training and a great deal of materials to support deaf and hard of hearing students both in high school and in college. Our next set of centers are systems change centers, and what we think of in terms of systems change is a top-down approach. Next, I'd like to take a look at some of our systems centers, which are about top-down change. The State Implementation and Scaling Up of Evidence-Based Practices, or CSEP, is there to help us to establish implementation and scaling capacity in state, regional, and district educational systems. Essentially, what CSEP is about is how does an entity get something that is effective in a school or district to be implemented statewide. They provide a great deal of services in terms of increasing the knowledge of evidence-based implementation supports. They have established implementation infrastructures in SEAs and LEAs in support of full and effective use of evidence-based approaches to education. Most importantly, if as an RDA goal you have to provide evidence-based reading instruction throughout the state, you need some help perhaps in scaling up that instruction so that it reaches every child in every classroom in the state. CSEP is your center. The next center is CEDAR, which is the Collaboration for Effective Educator Development. Essentially, this is a systems change to assist states in reforming their existing systems of teacher and leader preparation. What we're trying to do with this center is to drive IHE teacher training through revised licensure standards. What we're trying to do is to ensure that teachers are trained in the use of evidence-based practices. They are currently engaged in 20 states in intensive technical assistance, and they have a large number of materials that would be extremely useful to any state. The flip side to CEDAR is the Early Childhood Personnel Center, which focuses on birth to 5. And basically what they are about is to facilitate on a national basis the implementation of integrated and comprehensive systems of personnel development in early childhood. Essentially, they're working with states to update their professional standards consistent with the recommended practices of the Division of Exceptional Children and CEC for staff who work with early childhood children with disabilities. Our next center that's a systems center is SWIFT, the School-Wide Integrated Framework for Transformation. SWIFT is a national K-8 technical assistance center that builds school capacity to provide academic and behavior support to improve outcomes for all students through equity-based inclusion. And this center incorporates previous work on multi-tiered systems of support and current implementation science. Our next center is the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, and they are funded to support early intervention and preschool special education programs and practitioners. They assist states in building effective, efficient systems, scaling up and sustaining effective services, and promoting research-based intervention for early childhood programs. They have a large focus on early childhood outcomes, and I'm sure that all of our states who are familiar with the focus on early childhood outcomes are familiar with ECTA. Our next group of centers are information centers. The first is our Great Teachers and Leaders Center, which is jointly funded with the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education. This center supports states in their efforts to ensure that students have access to great teachers. They provide technical assistance, tools and publications, and convenings. A center that deserves a great deal of attention is Power Up. And Power Up is about technology solutions. They find customizable technology resources for teachers, school leaders, professional development facilitators, and teacher educators to improve teaching and learning for struggling students and those with disabilities. They focus on teaching strategies supported by technology use in schools, and universal design for learning and differentiated instruction. Our next information center is the Center on Online Learning. And the Center on Online Learning was essentially chartered to answer a question of how are students with disabilities' unique needs being met in the context of online learning. They have a huge amount of information. Much of it will focus on that kids with disabilities' needs are not, in fact, being met in the context of online learning, that there is a paucity of differentiated instruction to meet special education needs. And this center has focused on that, has highlighted that, and we're moving towards some solutions for that. The next center is the Center for Parent Information and Resources, and it serves as a central resource for information and products to the community of parent training and information centers and the CPRCs, so they can focus their efforts on serving families of children with disability rather than developing their own products. They have links to all of the funded parent centers and a library of over 650 resources developed by OSEP grantees, federal agencies, and other partners. The last group of centers that I'd like to talk about are our data centers. And we have 4 interconnected data centers. The first is DAISY, which focuses on early childhood. It assists states with the development or enhancement of data systems for Part C early intervention and Part B preschool special education programs. And there's a focus in DAISY on integrated data systems. CIFR is our finance center, and it provides TA to SEAs to help them meet their federal obligation to collect and report special education fiscal data, specifically maintenance of fiscal support and LEA maintenance of effort reduction and coordinated early intervening services. CID, which is the Center for Integration of Data, is essentially a center that supports the integration of Part B and other data streams in the state, such as other federal programs such as Title I. Our last center is the IDEA Data Center, or IDC, which supports both B and C. They provide technical assistance to build state capacities for collecting, reporting, analyzing, and perhaps most importantly, using IDEA Part B, Part C data, 616 and 618, including communicating with locals about data quality. So I want to thank you for your attention. I realize this was a smorgasbord of programs. I greatly encourage you to go on the www.tadnet and go to Find a Center to get much more information about these centers. We are here to support your efforts in improving outcomes for kids with disabilities and their families. I thank you. Enjoy the conference.